All right, kids, I'm going to read you chapter 15. Chapter 15, Jan finds a new pal. Now remember at the end of chapter 14 that Jan has disappeared. We know that there is a chimpanzee that has escaped from the zoo. We also know that Jan has a thing for animals. When we first met Jan, when he encountered Joseph at the rubble of Joseph's house, Jan had a little kitten with him. Later on, Jan had Jimpy the rooster with him. We know that Jimpy died in the scrimmage at the soup kitchen. We don't know what happened to the kitten. We do know that Jan gave Ivan a dead lizard when he made up with him. You know, when Jan had to go apologize to Ivan and try to get his shoes back before they left from Warsaw to walk to Posen. So we know that Jan has a thing for animals. Let's see what this chapter is going to be about. Okay, I want you to listen in this chapter to see, or maybe even make a guess before I start reading. Who do you think Jan's new friend is going to be? Will it be a person? Will it be Edik? Will it be something else? Okay, chapter 15. Later that week, in the sitting room of a Berlin house which had been commandeered for him, a British officer was writing home to his wife. It was the officer whose jeep had so nearly knocked Jan over outside the station. Dearest Jane, he wrote, my unit's been in Berlin a week now. We're here to meet the Russians. You never saw such a place. Other cities were badly blitzed, but not on this scale. I've seen pictures of it as it used to be, one of the world's great capitals. Now it's more like a moon landscape, craters everywhere, mountains of rubble. The Reichstag and the Kaiser's palace are roofless. Unter den Linden is piled with wreckage. And the strangest things keep happening. How's this for one? I've been attacked by a chimpanzee. Don't worry, I'm quite okay. Not hurt at all. On Wednesday, I was sitting in the Jeep with my driver studying a map. I had a cigarette in my mouth and was about to light it when a hand slid over my shoulder, clapped on my lips, and tweaked the cigarette out. I looked round and saw a chimpanzee jumping up and down on the back seat with the cigarette in his mouth. You never saw such a revolting creature. Huge arms, hairy chest as broad as mine, deep-set, evil eyes, and the face of a heavyweight boxer. He could have knocked the pair of us into the middle of next month, but we didn't stay to let him. We streaked out the door and left him to his dancing. Quite a crowd was gathering. They kept their distance, of course, and I heard someone say the chimp was called Bistro, and he'd escaped from the zoo, or what was left of it after the bombing. He had a chain round his neck, and it kept clanking against the tailboard as he jumped. He seemed to be in a rage because he hadn't any matches, or because he'd swallowed the cigarette, and it was making his belly ache. When he was tired of jumping, he sat down in the driver's seat and started fiddling with the controls. That put the wind up me. There was a goodish slope on the street, and 50 yards ahead a bomb crater big enough to swallow a church, and cordoned off with it only a bit of rope and a plank or two. If the jeep took a header down there, I should be answerable. Come on, Jim, I said to my driver. We'll have to do something about this. But my knees were like jelly, and I think Jim's were too. The strangest thing happened. A boy stepped out of the crowd, one of the thousands of urchins that abound in the ruins here. An urchin is a kid that looks rough. Okay? One of the urchins that abound in the ruins here, about 11 or 12 years old, I should say, and you can never tell with these kids, they're so undernourished. I shouted to him in German to come back, but he didn't understand. He was a Pole, and his name was Jan, though I did not know that till afterwards, but I recognized him as a boy we'd nearly run down in the street the day before. He walked right on, quite unafraid, and when he was alongside the jeep, he said in a gentle voice, "Hello, Bistro." The chimp gave him a dirty look, but Jan only grinned. He fished something out of a small wooden box he was carrying, and it made the chimp curious. It was a cigarette and matches. He handed over the cigarette, then the matches. "Ooh, Waro, said Bistro, and he lit up at once and flung away the matches. He sat back in the driver's seat, inhaling, puffing out clouds of smoke from his nose, and all the while keeping his eyes fixed on Jan. Quite suddenly, Bistro stood up and held out a soft, pink-palmed hand for the boy to shake. Then he climbed over onto the back seat and lay down, his legs crossed, and puffed away. It, pardon me, it may have been my imagination, but I swear that the jeep began to move. Like a fool, I tiptoed up behind and called out in my best German, "Sonny, put the brakes on. She's beginning to shift." He didn't understand. I pantomimed the action, but Bistro didn't like me. He sat up and screamed. Then he opened the toolbox, which Jim had been far-sighted enough to leave on the floor, and flung the wheel brace at me. It made him mad to see me duck, so he generously made me a present of the whole toolbox, plus contents in one almighty fling. It hit the pavement, scattering the crowd. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him leap onto the back and shoot after me. I don't know what happened next. I ran for my life. It was all rubble and dust and scramble up here and slid down there. Pardon me, and slide down there. I ran behind a wall, panting. Then I realized I wasn't being followed anymore, and I heard the boy's shrill voice scolding. I peeped out, down into the street. The boy got a stick from somewhere and was standing with it raised above his head. Bistro lay in the dust at his feet, his face and head covered with his long arms, whimpering. I don't know whether the boy had struck him or not. I expect not, for I guess it would have been as effective as trying to knock down the Eiffel Tower with a fly swatter. But there was no doubt about the scolding he gave. When it was all over, Bistro sat up cautiously and started to pick a few fleas out of his chest and eat them. He offered one to Jan as a peace offering. Then Bistro did something to Jan that would have killed me dead of fright if I'd been in his place. He took the boy's hand in his, lifted it to his mouth, and bit his finger. Jan stood as still as a rock. Some sixth sense, which most people don't possess, must have whispered to him what the chimp was up to. It wasn't a real bite, only a nip, and a token of friendship between the two. So the keeper explained afterward. When Bistro gave his hand to the boy in return, Jan knew what to do. He gave it a friendly nip with his teeth. Next thing I knew, Jan was leading him down the street by the chain, only Bistro didn't wear it like a prisoner's chain, but with pride and glory, as if it were a chain of office. That's not quite the end of the story. Jim had fixed up the jeep and braked it properly. Now he was picking up the scattered tools, and I saw he had the boy's wooden box too. I strolled over to help him, or rather to direct operations, as it doesn't do for an officer to go down on his hands and knees. I felt a fool in front of all those people. I knew they were laughing at me. Then I saw a small silver sword, sort of a paper knife, lying in the dust. It hardly looked worth bothering about, but I got Jim to pick it up. Two keepers had arrived by now and were leading Bistro away. We found Jan, and Jim handed him his wooden box. Seeing the lid was loose, the boy checked through the contents in great agitation, then burst into tears. I tried to ask him what was the matter. Then I remembered the silver sword, and showing it to him, asked him if he'd lost it. The cloudburst ended abruptly, and out came the sun again. He seized it greedily, wrapped it up, and popped it into the box amongst the other treasures. It didn't seem to me worth all the fuss he made, but evidently he attached some importance to it. I invited Jan round to my lodgings for dinner. He looked as if he hadn't had a square meal since he was born, and he turned up promptly with 3 other Polish children, as skinny as himself. Luckily, Frau Schmidt's larder, with its army rations, was equal to the occasion. One of them, a 16-year-old lad named Eddick, with a cough like a deep-sea foghorn, spoke some German, so I learned all about them. They're on their way to Switzerland to find their parents. Started from Warsaw last month, and they don't mind footing it all the way, if they have to. Jan doesn't really belong at all. Ruth, the eldest, about 17, picked him up on a slag heap half dead and adopted him. She's a remarkable girl, quiet and self-assured, with the most striking eyes. They have a deep serenity, a sense of purpose and moral authority quite unmistakable. No wonder they look up to her as a mother and a leader, too. Eddick is brave and intelligent, and he looks as if he has suffered a lot. He spent nearly 2 years slaving for the Nazis. You could see it in his face. A kid's face oughtn't to be creased and pinched like his. I wonder if he'll hold out. Switzerland's a long way. The one that took my fancy most was Branya, the youngest. Blue eyes, very fair hair. She seemed to live in a dream world, like our own Jenny, as I remember her on my last leave. I didn't understand a word Branya said, and she didn't understand a word I said, but we got on fine together. If they don't find what they're looking for in Switzerland, and I'm afraid it might only be a mirage, I was wondering if perhaps but it's no use thinking that way. I'm sure Ruth wouldn't part with the child, and quite right, too. I scrounged some clothes and army rations for them, and they left in the afternoon, singing at the top of their voices. It went right to my heart. Tomorrow they start on the next stage of their journey, 750 miles. That's all, dear. More next week. My love to you, and a special hug for Jenny. Mark. P.S. Frau Schmidt had the cheek to wave me up in the middle of the night to tell me some of her silver was missing, and she accused these Polish children. I couldn't have cared less. They could have walked off with half the house for all I minded. Really, these Germans, they spend 5 years looting Europe and then come crying to you in the middle of the night because someone's pinched a jam spoon. We found the missing silver in the letter box next morning. I bet my bottom dollar it was Jan who pinched it. You never saw such a mischievous face. And Ruth, who made him take it back. She's got as firm a hold over that family as Jan has over that chimp. Or as Jan had over the chimp. All right, that's the end of chapter 15. Okay? I want you to think about what the titles of the chapters meant. Okay? It seems to me like sometimes the chapter titles can mean more than one thing. So I want you to ask yourself, who was Jan's new friend? Did he just make one new friend? All right. I'll see you next time to read chapter 16.